Have you ever heard someone speak from across a crowded room and recognized them before you even saw their face? Maybe their voice was deep, maybe it was high, maybe it was soft, maybe it was loud, maybe it had a strange accent or a rhythm you immediately recognized. Every human voice is different. Even identical twins can sound surprisingly different. But why? Why doesn't everyone sound roughly the same? Why can one person have a deep voice while another has a much higher voice? Why do children sound different from adults? Why do men and women often have different average voices? And why can you sometimes guess where someone grew up just by listening to them speak? It seems like a simple question, but your voice is actually the result of several different systems working together. Your lungs, your throat, your vocal cords, your mouth, your tongue, your nose, your skull, and most importantly, your brain. Together, they create something almost completely unique, your voice. But here's the strange part. Humans didn't evolve voices because they wanted to sound different. We evolved the ability to communicate. And once communication became important, small differences in anatomy, development, environment, and behavior began shaping the sounds each person produced. To understand why, imagine yourself thousands of years ago. There are no phones, no radios, no microphones, no written messages. Your group is spread across a forest. You can't see everyone, but you hear something, a familiar voice. Someone from your group is calling. You immediately recognize who it is. That recognition could be useful because voices carry information even when faces are hidden. A person can call from behind a tree. A parent can call to a child from across a camp. A hunter can warn the group without seeing everyone. A voice can travel through darkness. It can travel through vegetation. It can travel across open landscapes. And unlike a physical signal, it can move through the air. This makes vocal communication incredibly powerful. But where does the sound actually come from? It starts with something surprisingly simple: air. When you speak, your lungs push air upward. The air travels through your windpipe and reaches your larynx. Inside your larynx are two small structures called vocal folds. You might know them as vocal cords. When air passes through them, they vibrate. That vibration creates a sound. But at this point, it doesn't sound much like your voice. It is more like a raw buzzing signal. The interesting part happens next. That sound travels through your throat, your mouth, and sometimes your nose. These spaces reshape the sound. They act like a natural acoustic chamber. And this is one of the reasons voices differ, because no two human bodies are exactly the same. Your vocal folds aren't exactly the same size as someone else's. Your throat isn't exactly the same shape. Your mouth isn't identical. Your tongue isn't identical. Even the shape of your skull and facial structures can influence the sound. So when the same basic system operates inside different bodies, it produces different results. Think of it like musical instruments. Two guitars may look almost identical, but they can still sound slightly different. Change the size of the instrument, the shape of the body, or the material, and the sound changes. Your body works in a similar way. But there is another major factor: size. In general, larger vocal folds tend to vibrate more slowly. Slower vibration produces a lower fundamental frequency. Smaller vocal folds tend to vibrate faster. That produces a higher fundamental frequency. This is one reason children usually have higher voices than adults. As children grow, their bodies change. Their larynx grows, their vocal folds become longer and thicker, and their voices usually become deeper. This change becomes especially noticeable during puberty. For many boys, the larynx grows significantly. The vocal folds become longer and thicker. The voice may suddenly sound much lower. This is what we commonly call the voice breaking. Girls also experience changes in the larynx and vocal folds, but the average change in pitch is usually smaller. This contributes to the average difference between adult male and female voices. But averages are not rules. There are women with very deep voices. There are men with relatively high voices. And there is enormous variation within every population. Because your voice is not determined by one single feature, it is the result of many interacting factors. Genetics plays a major role. Your genes influence the development of your body, including the structures involved in producing sound. But genetics doesn't completely determine what you will sound like. Your environment matters too. So does your behavior. And one of the most important influences begins surprisingly early: the voices you hear around you. Imagine two children. One grows up hearing one language. The other grows up hearing a completely different language. Their vocal anatomy may be broadly similar, but their brains learn different patterns, different sounds, different rhythms, different ways of moving the tongue, different ways of shaping the mouth. Over time, those patterns become automatic. This is why accents can be so powerful. An accent isn't simply a strange way of pronouncing words. It is the result of your brain learning the sound patterns of the people around you. A child doesn't sit down and consciously decide, "I am going to develop this accent." Their brain simply absorbs what it hears, and eventually, those patterns become part of how they speak. This is also why accents are usually easier to acquire during childhood. The developing brain is extremely flexible. It is constantly learning which sounds matter, which differences are important, and which patterns should be reproduced. But as we grow older, those sound patterns become increasingly established. You can still learn a new accent as an adult, but it often requires much more conscious effort. And even then, your original speech patterns may remain. So your voice is partly physical and partly learned. But there is something even more interesting. Your voice can change depending on who you're talking to. You might speak differently with your friends than with your boss. You might speak differently with a child than with a stranger. You might become louder in a noisy environment. You might slow down when explaining something complicated. You might change your tone when you're angry, excited, nervous, or afraid. This means your voice isn't a fixed object. It is constantly responding to your environment, and your emotions can change it too. When you're nervous, your breathing may become different. Your muscles may tense. Your pitch can change. When you're excited, you might speak faster. When you're sad, your voice may become quieter or slower. When you're angry, your voice may become louder and more forceful. Your voice is therefore doing more than transmitting words. It is also transmitting information about your emotional state. And humans are surprisingly good at detecting that information. You can sometimes tell that someone is nervous, even when they say they're completely fine. You can hear excitement in someone's voice. You can hear hesitation. You can hear confidence. You can hear fear. Sometimes you can even recognize sarcasm without seeing the person's face. Your brain is constantly analyzing tiny changes in pitch, timing, and rhythm. But why would humans become so sensitive to voices in the first place? Because communication was never just about exchanging information. It was also about social relationships. Imagine living in a small prehistoric group. You know the people around you extremely well. You know their faces, their movements, their habits, and their voices. If someone calls from the darkness, you may not need to see them. You already know who they are. This creates another important feature of human voices: individual identity. Your voice can function almost like an acoustic fingerprint. Not a perfect one, but a surprisingly useful one. The combination of your anatomy, your learned speech patterns, your accent, your rhythm, and your habitual way of speaking creates a sound that is difficult to reproduce exactly. This is why people can sometimes recognize a close friend just from a few words, even over a bad phone connection, even when the person sounds tired, even when they haven't spoken for months. Your brain isn't listening to every sound separately. It is recognizing a familiar pattern. And there is another reason human voices can differ so much. Evolution doesn't create every trait in isolation. The human body is a compromise. A larger body may influence the size of the vocal tract. A longer vocal tract can influence resonance. Hormones influence development. Genetics influences anatomy. Environment influences speech. Culture influences pronunciation. Experience influences speaking habits. All of these factors interact. That's why there isn't a single human voice. There is a huge spectrum. And that spectrum can change throughout your entire life. A baby doesn't sound like a child. A child doesn't sound like an adult. An adult doesn't necessarily sound the same at 20 as they do at 70. Your vocal folds change with age. Your muscles change. Your lungs change. Your tissues change. Even your speaking habits can change. This is why elderly people may have voices that sound weaker, breathier, or different from when they were younger. Your voice is literally something your body creates, and your body never stops changing. But there is one question that makes all of this even more fascinating. If human voices are so different, why can we understand each other at all? Because underneath all that variation, humans share a remarkable biological system. We all use air. We all have vocal folds. We all shape sound using the vocal tract, and our brains are specialized for interpreting complex patterns. Different voices, same basic machinery. It's almost like millions of slightly different instruments, all capable of playing the same enormous collection of sounds. And that may be one of the most remarkable things about human communication. Your voice is both universal and completely personal. Every human being inherits roughly the same basic biological equipment. Yet that equipment produces billions of different voices. Some deep, some high, some rough, some smooth, some quiet, some powerful, some instantly recognizable, and some that you may never hear again, but remember for the rest of your life. Your voice is shaped by your genes, but also by the people you grew up around, by the language you learned, by your age, by your body, by your emotions, by your experiences, and by thousands of tiny habits you probably never consciously noticed. So the next time you hear yourself speaking, remember what is actually happening. Air leaves your lungs. Your vocal folds vibrate. Your throat and mouth shape the sound. Your brain controls the movements. And years of experience determine how those movements are used. A simple stream of air becomes words. Words become meaning. And meaning becomes communication. That's why humans have different voices. Not because evolution designed every person to sound unique, but because evolution gave us a flexible system, and millions of individual lives shaped what came out of it. Your voice isn't just a sound. It is the result of your biology, your development, your environment, and your history, all vibrating together.